This time around, I will again talk about game moderation, but also playtesting and game design. I'll start by saying I've played around 400 to 600 hours of Tabletop across different systems, mainly Dungeons and Dragons and Arduin, with a little Exalted thrown in there. The real issue with tabletop roleplay is scheduling. You need a consistent group and a consistent moderator or moderators. The problem I ran into early on was there were only a few GMs available, and they all had work life to attend to as well. Once I got a job, I got some books for myself and learned how to run a game. This was late in high school. In this case, Arduin. I particularly liked how Dave Hargrave's instructions to the game master read. These books are all a guideline, a suggestion for good roleplay. None of the rules were solid. I've since piled up between 1,200 and 1,400 hours of game moderation experience across various game platforms, mainly Arduin, but also games I designed myself or had a hand in designing. My goal in tabletop gameplay is for everyone involved to have as much fun as they can with the time we're given. There are two large things I've found that can get in the way of that, regardless of the quality of the player or moderator. Too many rules, and dice rolls outside of the standard average. With the dice rolls, it can kill the mood of the game, especially if your game is dependent on good dice rolls for any kind of successes at all. I remember playing a teenage boy and my friend playing a troll, and we cleared out a small town, even with a full barracks of guards, because the GM couldn't roll well at all. I remember playing a ninja in Naruto, in a Naruto campaign, and sadly, metagaming, doing things that my character wouldn't do. My dice rolls were so bad that I tried to get everything done that my ninja could without rolling a single die, or it was suicide. This Naruto campaign was run in a D20 system, and when I played this ninja, I would regularly go entire sessions without rolling above an 8 on a 20-sided die. Outside of extreme dice trends, rules can ruin gameplay. There's a trope in the Dungeons & Dragons community, and you can see it played out in almost every fan film, where the players study the rulebooks like a Bible, and will snipe the moderator on any infraction of the rules that hinders their progress. But at the same time, those players, they won't moderate themselves. There are game systems or unspoken rules that stagnate gameplay and make for arbitrary and stuffy dice rolls. I'll give you an example of a stuffy phenomenon. This can be quite common in Dungeons & Dragons, and it is definitely common in Arduin. The coup de grace, the finishing blow, or slitting a victim's throat who is unable to resist you or who does not know you're there. No GM really wants to let someone just kill somebody else, especially if you have a player killing an enemy, even if they're sleeping in their bed or they're, let's say, knocked unconscious, and you're just going to go over there and you're going to take a blade and you are going to cut open a slit across their throat, and then they'll die. Now, these are things that an ordinary person shouldn't be able to mess up, much less, highly trained, moderate, medium, or even low-level warrior or assassin types. There should not really even be a roll involved, but you have to make them roll because they could always fail. And the crappy thing is, they do. You'll have someone standing there paralyzed. Well, this person is paralyzed. I'm going to put a knife in their throat and I'm going to kill them. Oh, you broke your knife and your Achilles tendon. So there have been some jokes that I've thrown around my group where, if you can, especially since this is fantasy roleplay, just hire a goon, hire a buddy, hire a slave. You hire a slave, you make sure the slave has all sorts of food so that they never die of starvation, and you give that slave a knife. And you make that slave, the slave being an NPC, run around and slit all the throats, because an NPC doesn't need to make these rolls, only a player character does. So the top assassins in any of these games generally have a henchman so that the player character themselves don't have to roll the die to kill the sleeping, vulnerable, unable to defend themselves targets. Now, as a GM, you can choose to forego these things yourself, but there's a real problem there in that it becomes it can become too easy, especially if you have, like, let's say a mage and their main thing is just to put everybody to sleep and then slit their throats. You have to put that little challenge in there, that die roll, to see if they screw up slitting the throat, because otherwise there's no challenge for the person at all when they get their sleep spell off, aside from making your enemies resist a whole bunch. But just nonsense like that can really clog up gameplay. So when I went to look at helping design or designing my own game systems, rules more often than dice rolls are what got in the way. I've had a really engaging sets of rules, but I'm very math-minded. I do math quickly in my head, and I enjoy it. You can't expect that from all your players. So most of the game systems that I have designed, although I've gone through some playtesting, they would always be much better coded into computer where it's not slowed down by the math. An example of some of the systems I've made systems that tabletop involve actual combination gameplay. For example, if you watch or play a lot of these competitive 2 or 3D fighting games, you have your chains of combos, etc., etc. I've set up systems like that, but the problem is it's a lot of dice and it's a lot of numbers, and that really slows down the gameplay in what should be a fast-paced setting. I've also found that the smaller your rule set that you can get to handle a game, the smoother the game will go. Now, it's going to be kind of a blank slate, again, because you don't have rules for absolutely everything. But the nice thing there is you have a little bit more of a storytelling session between the players and the moderator without the discussion or arbitration over the rules. Some people live not to play the game, not to play the character. Some people just live to arbitrate and argue over the rules. And in that case, they should look at engaging in debate clubs. Problem is, that stuff's not really available on the average. But getting back to the point, I'll actually end up laying out on here a couple of the game systems that I have run that have worked. One of them, the most successful that I have run, that I'll do an intro and entire description. I'll lay it all out, how you can play it, what you need to play it, absolutely free of charge, and it's actually not too expensive to get the materials to play it. It's called The Stone Path, and it's a bit of a resource management game, but it's mostly dealt on argument. And I built this, again, because I had a pool of players that loved, the real joy they got out of the game was arguing over the semantics of the rules. That came first and foremost in front of the actual joy of the gameplay or fleshing out their character. They very much loved contesting the rules. They very much loved contesting the writing of the rules. And that's how they got their most enjoyable part of the gameplay. So I designed a system that incorporated that, and it succeeded very, very well with those people. So one of the videos I will do after this one is laying out The Stone Path, which is an argument-based game. It does have some dice rolls, but it's mostly resource management and creative thinking. Now, beyond that, I've also helped to design or actually implement a piggyback onto, I want to say it was D&D 2.0, that was a Naruto Ninja universe. That was quite fun. And then the creator that did a second version of it that was supposed to stand alone by itself, I had a larger hand in that. And the two systems, although they both encompass the Naruto universe very well, run very differently from one another. And the roll of a 20 on the 20-sided dice in the first system, like many, denotes a critical success. And that would change various circumstances, depending on what you were doing in the game, to a very large degree. The problem is, in the first version, for any offensive action, the person generally got a defensive action, and so you could have a critical success canceled out by a critical defense. And a large number of either 1s or 20s in this system really off-ended the gameplay. Either it could cause a underdog group to surge to victory, or it could cause, well, I guess the exact opposite side. It could cause a single undefeatable opponent to remain unscathed while standing in a blast furnace. from the migration of the first system to the second system, he still did a 20-point roll. That is, you would get values from 1 to 20, or more accurately, 2 to 20, because he switched from a d20 roll to 2 d10s. That is, you would roll 2 10-sided dice and you would add up the result. And that put the extremes as a 1%. If you needed a score of 20 for a critical success, that would only happen 1% of the time. If you needed a score of 2, the absolute lowest score, for a failure, that would only happen 1% of the time. And it left a lot more room in the middle for you to have success or failure without off-ending the gameplay. And it made for a lot smoother transition, and it really didn't take you out of the world as much. That's, especially with roleplay, the immersion is important. If you spend a lot of time diagnosing and arguing or trying to invalidate the rules, you don't spend a lot of time engaged in whatever world you're playing around in. And for me and for a lot of my players, they very much rather enjoy staying in the world than debating the physics of the world or the rules of the world. I might touch on the stories of those systems, but those aren't mine to explain. I've actually run the first Arduin, or the first Nardo system piggybacked off of D&D 2.0, so I've known it well enough to run it. I might tell about those sessions, but those systems aren't mine, so I won't share them in their entirety. The last system I created, because I've wanted it for so long, was a Dragon Ball Z themed roleplay system. And I got a couple of different books for a couple of different gaming systems. None of them were clear. I read them from cover to cover. I could never figure out the process, or if I was reading it correctly, you would be using piles and piles of 6-sided dice to do anything. So I created a Dragon Ball Z, or Dragon Ball, whatever you want to call it. You can span it throughout the entire universe, system, with relatively low dice rolls, relatively simplified character sheets, and relatively simplified rules. You would really just have to either have the moderator be a large fan with a lot of knowledge on the Dragon Ball universe, or collectively the group would have to have a lot of knowledge. Now, hand in hand with that comes play testing. If you're going to design or even play these games that I'll lay out, but if you're going to design games yourself, you have to be able to have a good group to test them with. Some people won't enjoy the gameplay if their character doesn't do well. Some people won't enjoy the gameplay if their actions don't work, or if the rules don't work the way that they want them to. Well, that's for finished games. If you're designing or play testing, you do need to be able to do the metagaming. You need to be able to step away from what's going on in the game, and that's when you have your arguing or arbitration over the rules. The whole idea is to get something put together that you can enjoy later, the initial investment. When you're looking at, and I'm going to quote Dungeons & Dragons again, all the way from the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons through advanced Dungeons & Dragons, all the way to, what we have Pathfinder now, and I think 4.0 or 4 point something for Dungeons & Dragons, there's a large investment. There's a lot of work put into all of that and balancing it and making a system that works. So if you are designing a game, expect it to take sessions and sessions of playtesting before it works out. And yeah, you can grow it while you're playing it. But at the same point, if you intend to playtest a game, the people can't look to have a success or character development, etc., specific to them, because you're just testing scenarios. Now, if there are any specific things that I guess what my limited audience has to ask about moderating or role-playing, as I've done a very, very decent job. I've gotten all sorts of compliments. I got plenty of people that wouldn't do tabletop roleplay at all, and then afterwards they wouldn't do it unless it was with me moderating. So if you have trouble, either with players, with rules, or with playtime, go ahead and start a conversation. Ask a few questions underneath this video. And I'll get you some advice, or I'll give you some anecdotal, or I'll direct you to some resource websites. Other than that, this was basically just an intro laying down when and why I'm going to upload some gaming systems for you guys to try out, some tabletop gaming systems. So, hope to hear from you.